thought bringing the iced tea would help. Not because anyone asked, but because I still remembered the way Grandpa used to drink it. Half sweet, half not poured into a chipped mason jar with a lemon wedge that was never quite fresh. I made it the night before, strained it twice, packed it in a cooler, wrapped with the old marine towel I kept under my sink. It wasn't an offering, not exactly. More like proof that I still showed up the right way even when no one asked me to. Hallie had sent the message a week earlier. Just 3 lines. Big BBQ this Saturday. Come if you can. Would mean a lot to Dad. No emojis. No follow-ups. Just a request sent like a flyer to someone whose name was still on the mailing list, but whose seat had long been replaced. I wore jeans that didn't quite fit anymore, and a soft blue shirt I hadn't touched since basic. It had a bleach spot on the sleeve barely visible, like the kind of mistake you ignore until it's too late to do anything about. My boots still had dust in the seams. I didn't brush it off. I didn't press my hair, either. I figured if they wanted polish, they could hand it to Hallie, like they always did. The house looked the same, though the hedges were trimmed cleaner than I remembered, and there was a new sign over the fence that read, "The Whitmore Gathering." The font was cursive. Someone had paid for it. People were already there. Lawn chairs in haphazard circles, kids running with plastic swords, music that sounded curated to feel relatable. I stood by the driveway longer than necessary, gripping the tea with bow. Joanna Monroe waved from near the grill. Her smile was tight, professional, like someone rehearsing kindness for a client. "You made it." I nodded. Didn't know there'd be this many people. She adjusted her sunglasses even though the sun was behind her. "Well, Hallie's been busy, with the foundation and all. A lot of new supporters. Supporters, not friends, not family, just attendees in linen shirts and dry compliments." I walked across the yard past folding tables dressed in gingham and disposable cutlery. I placed the tea near the other drinks. No one looked. I found a paper plate added ribs I wouldn't eat, and coleslaw that already bled into itself. A woman I didn't recognize asked whose daughter I was. I said nothing, and stepped aside. Then he cleared his throat. Dad stood near the arbor, 1 foot forward, like he was about to deliver a eulogy for someone still breathing. The microphone whined once before adjusting to his voice. "I didn't expect a microphone. I didn't expect a speech. I think it's time," he said, lifting a gold-trimmed envelope like it was a flag, "to recognize the daughter who's really made us proud." Laughter. Applause. The kind that starts on cue, not from feeling. Hallie stepped forward. Her dress looked steamed. She touched her chest like she'd just heard her name at a pageant, not from the man who taught us to say "yes, sir" and fold corners on our sheets. She took the envelope, opened it slowly, played surprised. 7 million, she said like it had slipped out. Dad beamed. "For the new condo in Manhattan. For law school. For all the ways you've honored this family." The crowd leaned in. Phone cameras hovered like bee, then he turned toward me. His smile stayed in place like it was stapled. "As for Lainey," he said, "well, you've always been the independent one." I didn't blink. "So go build your own legacy. You never needed much help, did you?" Someone laughed. A small, brittle sound. I placed my plate on the corner of the table. The ribs tilted. A napkin caught the coleslaw before it touched the grass. I tightened my grip on nothing. Mom stood nearby, arms crossed, her nails matching the ribbon on Hallie's envelope. She didn't look at me, didn't nod, just sipped from her cup like the moment hadn't broken anything worth fixing. Hallie avoided my eyes. She smiled at her envelope like it told a better story than any of us could. I turned. Not quickly. just enough to avoid anyone calling after me. Not that they would. The gate latch stuck the way it always had. I pressed down and let it groan. It was the loudest thing I'd done all day. Halfway down the driveway, Aunt Maggie caught up. Her shoes were uneven on the gravel, and she carried a plate she hadn't eaten from. "You're leaving." I stopped. Not for her. Just to breathe. She lowered her voice. "You're just going to let them do that?" I looked at her. Her eyes soft with knowing weren't surprised. Only tired. "You've let them do it for 20 years. That shut it down. She didn't follow. I got in the truck. The tea still sat in the cooler behind the passenger seat. The glass jar had fogged from the heat. I thought of Grandpa, the way his hand would always shake when he handed me the jar. Always half full. Always cold. The tea hadn't been touched. I drove out of town with the radio off. Every road I passed looked like the kind of place people didn't notice unless they'd grown up on it. I kept thinking about the microphone, the way my name had been used not to welcome, but to dismiss. No one had shouted, no one had pushed me, but I'd been erased while standing in full view. There's something about watching your family celebrate your absence that makes your ribs feel like they're sitting outside your body. I didn't cry. I didn't grip the steering wheel tighter. I just kept driving. It wasn't until I reached the Wawa parking lot near the base that I saw the ring box on the passenger seat. Small, square, cheap velvet peeling at the corner. I'd carried it for no reason. Inside was Grandpa's class ring, the one he gave me when I made sergeant. He said I'd need something heavy to hold onto. I closed the box, set it back down. I thought of calling someone. No one came to mind. Instead, I sat there, window-cracked air thick with the smell of gasoline and sugar from a crushed soda can on the ground. The invitation still sat unread in my glove box. I hadn't thrown it away. I hadn't answered it either. Some things don't need a reply to be understood. I never used to keep anything in the glove box. The manual was always too thick, the pens ran dry before they mattered, and receipts faded faster than memory. But something made me open it anyway. Maybe I wanted a napkin. Maybe I just didn't want to hold the silence anymore. It was tucked behind an old deployment form, folded clean, yellowing at the edges like it had waited longer than it should have. My name written in block letters, I recognized immediately. The W curved just a little to the left. He never fixed that, even when I teased him about it. The paper wasn't long. 2 sentences, a name, and a warning that didn't read like drama. It read like someone who knew how people rewrote truth. If this reaches you, they didn't mean for it to. Find Frank Moss, and don't trust your father. The bottom corner had a mark where his thumb must have held it steady. I stared at that smudge longer than the ink. The back seat still smelled faintly of pine cleaner from a bottle I hadn't touched since before I left Quantico. The jar of tea clinked softly with every bump in the road, like it wanted to remind me of something I hadn't promised to remember. The map was hand-drawn, folded inside another envelope. No labels, just turns and lines, and a compass rose scribbled like a habit. It felt like him quietly precise, a man who measured everything by whether it could endure. It took 2 hours and 1 missed turn to find the gravel road. The tires grumbled, as if the truck didn't trust it, either. I followed the arrows, counted each mailbox until the trees opened into a clearing that looked like it belonged to someone who didn't expect visitors. The sign on the building was missing, no brass, no letters, just a door with a scratched window and a sticker for a unit I hadn't served in. The inside smelled like reheated coffee and paper older than the people reading it. He looked up from a ham sandwich, like I was late for something I never agreed to. His shirt sleeves were rolled, and his belt had a crack near the buckle. One look, and I knew he'd been warned about me. "You're Walter's girl." Not a question. I nodded. He didn't offer a chair, just pointed. "He said you'd come. Eventually." The folder he handed me had weight to it. Not just Pape No Lawyers, but me. No digital copies. He made that very clear. The first page had my name, full name, middle initial included. The second had a list of asset transfers signed in familiar pen strokes. The third was a photo. I was 12. Braces, hair in a crooked braid, standing on the porch of a cabin that hadn't changed since my hands were too small to open its door. He stood behind me in that flannel shirt he wore until the elbows thinned. I was saluting. Badly. He'd written on the back, "You've always had the grit. Now you've got the tools." I didn't read it again. I didn't need to. Frank leaned back like he'd watched this part before. He didn't trust anyone else. Said if they got to you first, none of this would survive. The next envelope had a different weight. A key, a name of a bank I didn't use, a drive marked with the year I was last deployed. No passwords, just initials etched into the metal casing. I held it like it might still be warm. "He was scared," Frank said. "Not of dying. Of what they'd do after." I said nothing, just flipped to the last page. The line under my name wasn't legal, it was personal. The legacy isn't the money, it's the memory, and they can't carry it. I closed the folder. My hands didn't shake. They just stopped moving for a moment longer than they should have. Frank cleared his throat. "He wanted this to go to you in person. Said he'd buried too many things to risk one more." I stood. He didn't reach for a handshake. "Cabin's yours now. So's the initiative. Just don't expect it to be clean." Back in the truck, I opened the box again. Inside was a list of contacts I hadn't seen in years, a schematic for a non-profit bearing my name, and a budget spreadsheet with notations in his handwriting. Every dollar had a reason. Every margin had a note. One line near the bottom read, "She won't ask for the spotlight. That's why she deserves it." I looked out the window. The trees weren't tall, but they were thick old enough to forget, rooted deep enough to outlast. They hadn't just buried money, they buried me. Not with cruelty, with convenience. There's a silence that comes when you realize someone rewrote your story while you were still living it. It doesn't scream. It just settles in your spine like cold. I didn't drive home. I didn't call Hallie. I didn't think of what I would say if anyone asked where I'd been. I just looked at that photograph one more time, fingers brushing the corner like it could tear if I wasn't careful. There's a difference between being erased and being forgotten. They erased me, and he remembered anyway. I didn't knock before opening the door. There was no one left to answer it, and I didn't need permission to step into a place that had once known the shape of my hands. The air inside felt untouched, not stale, exactly, just paused. As if it had been waiting for someone who'd forgotten they were expected. The photo was still on the mantel, not framed, just tucked between two old field notebooks with worn elastic bands. I recognized the image before I even reached for it. Crooked teeth, a sweatshirt 2 sizes too big. A man crouched behind me with one knee in the dirt, and his hand steady on my shoulder. Someone had wiped a thumbprint across the corner. It didn't smudge. I didn't unpack. I set the bag near the couch, the one with the same plaid blanket folded over the arm like it always had been. I didn't sit. I walked to the fireplace and tapped my foot gently against the baseboard until I found it the loose panel he never bothered to fix. I used the edge of my boot to wedge it open. The box inside wasn't hidden deep, just far enough to stay undisturbed. It was pine hand-cut, with hinges that squeaked when I lifted the lid. I expected old maps receipts, maybe a spare compass. Not this. Envelopes. Dozens, all with my name in ink that had begun to bleed. Dates written neatly in the top right corner, spanning 4 years. None of them torn. None mailed. The first one started simply. Lainey. I called again today. Your mother said you were out of the country, but Eli mentioned you'd been back a while. I'm not mad. Just trying to understand. The second was shorter. They told me you changed your number, that you asked not to be contacted. That doesn't sound like you. I'm leaving the porch light on anyway. I didn't read them in order. I couldn't. I opened randomly, pulling each page out as if it might dissolve between my fingers. Some were written on lined paper, some on notepads from his workshop. The handwriting stayed the same, though the sentences got smaller, less hopeful. One of the last ones had no greeting, just a line in the center of the page. Maybe I was wrong about being remembered. The paper shook when I set it down. Not because of my hands, because something had shifted between my ribs, something I hadn't noticed, until it made breathing feel mechanical. The tea was still cold in the jar. I drank from it without thinking. It tasted metallic, as if it had been left in the fridge too long. I let it sit on the table next to the letters and didn't wipe the ring it left behind. The phone barely rang before Caleb picked up. "You're at the cabin." It wasn't a question. I told him what I'd found. He paused longer than usual. "There's more," he said. "Check the drive Frank gave you. Folder marked Personal Comms. Scroll to the landline request." The laptop took a minute to boot, long enough for me to think about the last conversation I had with my father. He'd been rearranging silverware in the dining room, lining each piece perfectly. You could have been something you know, if you'd stayed out of the mud. He didn't look at me when he said it, just adjusted the forks and moved on. The folder opened. I clicked through until I saw the scanned note. Grandpa's handwriting clipped to a phone company form. Client requests reinstatement of discontinued landline. Claims daughter unreachable through mobile. The date was 6 months before he passed. Next to it, a handwritten comment from Frank, confirmed. Mobile access blocked. Admin override linked to Douglas Ashford. I didn't say anything. Caleb didn't either. He finally spoke. "You okay?" There were 3 unopened messages from my mother on my phone. None said what they were for. The last one read, "If you're going to make a scene, do it quietly." I muted the thread and dropped the phone beside the tea. I walked to the back room where Grandpa used to fix broken radios. The workbench looked untouched. Wrenches hung in a line, a pencil still resting behind the vice clamp. I checked beneath the drawer, remembering how he used to tape spare keys there, so he wouldn't owe the damn house anything. The key was still there. The locked cabinet in the corner opened with a click. Inside was another box. Smaller, black metal. A flash drive. A tape recorder. An envelope labeled in all caps for Lainey if they try to erase you. I didn't cry. Not there. Not yet. I sat on the floor, back against the workbench, knees bent like I had nowhere else to go. I held the recorder like it might bite. His voice came through grainy, like the tape had been played too many times even though I knew it hadn't. They always said you were too serious, but you were the only one paying attention. A chair creaked in the background, a breath caught in the middle. They'll say you were distant, that you changed, that you turned your back, but I know who turned first. He paused. Then, don't let them name you with their stories. The tape clicked off. I didn't rewind it. Somewhere in the kitchen, the old fridge hummed on. The windows creaked under wind that had learned to live without being noticed. I stayed on the floor until my spine ached from the boards. When I stood, I didn't bring the tape with me. I left it right there beside the pencil and the key. A kind of proof. There's a difference between being lost and being hidden. One can be undone. The other was done to you. Not everything that's buried stays forgotten. Some things wait like a ticking watch in a drawer no one opens anymore. I found the VHS player behind the cabinet, covered with an old t-shirt that still smelled faintly of pine and sweat. The handwriting on the cassette label was Walter's sharp, upright letters. Not a title, just a date, no explanation. I slid the tape in and pressed play. The screen crackled for a few seconds. Then the cabin living room came into view. Same plaid couch, same window glare cutting across the rug. My grandfather sat in the armchair back straight, hands clasped, wearing the navy flannel he always wore when he meant business. Across from him, my father paced, arms folded, mouth tight. "You want to hand it all over to a uniform?" Douglas didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Decorated one," Walter replied. "Hallie understands people. Lainey understands integrity. She won't know what to do with it. She won't need to use you to figure it out. No yelling, no threats. Just the kind of cold you feel under your skin long after the air goes still." My father's smirk was brief, but it registered. "She's not built for this. She obeys. She doesn't lead." Walter didn't blink. "She listens." "That's rarer than you think." The tape cut off right there. No fade. No sound. I didn't rewind it. I didn't need to watch it twice. I'd heard everything I needed to know, spoken not just in words, but in the pauses they left behind. The folder labeled Initiative sat heavy in the drawer beneath the player. I opened it, spread the documents across the table like puzzle pieces. Transaction records, endowment papers, signed charters. Walter's name inked neatly next to mine until the last set. Then it vanished. I called Caleb. No greetings, no pleasantries. Hallie's name is on everything now. I already knew. He continued. They rebranded 2 months after Walter passed. Whitmore Legacy Initiative is now the Hallie Ashford Future Fund. Your name's scrubbed. The board meetings list you as inactive due to conflict of interest. I flipped through the copies again. A page marked Chair Succession Timeline had a note scrawled in pen, not Walter's. Lainey removed not in alignment with public image. They didn't even pretend to lie well. They'll say it was a board decision, Caleb added. They'll say I was too busy, too absent. They'll say Hallie's more agreeable. They'll say a lot, I said. Do you want to go public? I looked at the cassette still spinning. The screen had gone black. No, not yet. Instead, I opened a second box. Letters Walter had written to banks, copies of communications with donors, photos of us at volunteer events one's never posted. I began sorting them into categories: legal, financial, personal, things they couldn't rewrite with a press release or a staged photo. I catalogued them silently. Some receipts were yellowing stapled to notes he'd scribbled on the back of grocery lists. One showed a transfer of 1.2 million tagged STEM Program L. Whitmore oversight. Another had initial outreach. Lainey suggestion effective underlined 3 times. They didn't erase me from the narrative. They erased the evidence that I ever mattered to it. The house phone rang once, then stopped. I led it. A few minutes later, a message popped up on my phone. Don't make this bigger than it is. Come home. My mother's punctuation was always clean. Her cruelty even cleaner. I opened my laptop and created 3 folders. They hid. He knew I know. I uploaded the video naming it with a timestamp. Only I would understand. I encrypted the documents. I backed everything up twice. Once to a drive in the drawer. Once to a secure server under a new name. I wasn't protecting secrets. I was preserving memory. By evening, the table looked like a war room. Notes color-coded, photos labeled, pages in sleeves, not frantic precise. I'd done this before. Different terrain, different target, but the same discipline. I found the old ring in a velvet pouch tucked behind the ledger books, a small band worn thin. Not valuable to anyone else. He used to tap it against the table when he was thinking. I slid it on and let it rest there, no movement, no sound. The last page in the folder was a printed email, addressed to me. Unsent. They'll forget eventually, but you'll remember, and that's what keeps history true. I didn't reply. There was no reply to give. I placed the ring beside the folder and turned off the lamp. The cabin dimmed slowly, as if exhaling. No dramatics, no speeches, just a long silence that no one could interrupt. Some wars don't need armies, they need archivists. Some truths don't arrive with thunder, they come quiet, like a paper sliding under a door. The keyboard Caleb gave me made a soft, worn, clicking sound just slightly uneven on the A and L keys. He told me it used to be his grandfather's. I didn't ask why he still used it. People hold on to strange things when the past won't answer. The spreadsheet filled slowly, each line a date, a figure, a note. I checked every transfer that crossed from Whitmore Legacy Initiative into Westfall Partners LLC or Blue Current Group. The names meant nothing at first, empty professional, but the tax records showed owners, Hallie, Douglas, a second cousin I hadn't spoken to since he borrowed my toolbox and forgot to return it. These aren't foundations, Caleb said. They're shells. He didn't say anything else, just kept forwarding bank statements and routing numbers. The silence between the emails said more. One entry sat heavier than the rest. March 19th, 2021. A government disbursement. Source Department of Veterans Affairs. Amount $250,000. Recipient. Hallie Ashford. Application. Veteran-led leadership program. Supporting record DD 214 form. Under my name. She didn't even change the branch of service, just copied what Walter had submitted 3 years earlier. She filed it as if the history belonged to her. I held the page longer than I needed to. There was a coffee stain in the margin, likely Walter's. His notes still lingered faintly in the edges of the documents he once filed by hand. No line was accidental. I reached under the floorboard and retrieved the second tape. It was labeled Buttery Legacy in fading ink. The cassette clicked into the player with a faint resistance. Walter's voice filled the cabin. Not grand, not planned, just paced. If they erase you, let them. But don't erase yourself. The files won't lie. Numbers don't flatter. If they deny what's been done, show them what can't be edited. There was a pause. A cough. Then again slower this time. Proof doesn't shout. It just waits. I copied the recording. Once to a thumb drive. Once to a password-protected cloud. I named the file WH-root Z3WAVE. I labeled the envelope in pencil, not pen. If they ever found it, I wanted to be able to change it back. The ring I'd set on the corner of the desk now rested atop a stack of folders, its metal catching a thin sliver of late light. It didn't sparkle. It held. I mailed the first hard drive to an address Caleb provided in Roanoke. No return address, just initials pressed into the label LW Archive. The second drive I placed in a tin box wrapped in a handkerchief from Walter's drawer. The fabric still held the outline of a pressed fold. I sealed it with packing tape and slid it beneath the third floorboard from the stove. The final copy I encrypted fragmented into 4 parts and stored across separate drives under unrelated file names. Nothing loud, nothing traceable, just enough to survive silence. I didn't text Hallie. I didn't email Douglas. I didn't hint at the growing web beneath their feet. At 3:11 a.m., my phone lit up. "Don't drag the family into your disappointment." The name read Mom, but I knew the voice behind it was collective. Earlier that day, she'd left a voicemail. "Hallie's doing her best. You should support that instead of digging up ghosts." There was a pause. Walter was old. He made mistakes. Let it rest. I didn't delete it. I just moved it to a folder named Unsent. Later, I typed a single line in my journal. "They build their legacies with lights and headlines. I build mine with files they thought I forgot." The receipts told stories better than any toast ever would. There was one from a cafe in Charlottesville, marked with a note in Walter's handwriting, met with L, about bored future. Dated 1 week before my deployment. Another invoice labeled legal consultation. Contingency had my name attached in the memo. I placed those in a manila folder marked disregarded. The documents weren't loud. They didn't accuse, but in their quiet, they endured. As the wind knocked gently against the cabin's frame, I reviewed everything one last time. I added small symbols to the corner of each document, dots, dashes, underlines, so I'd remember which had been duplicated, which stored, which shared. Caleb sent one last message that night. They'll pretend to be confused, until they can't. I stared at that line for a while. Not because I needed reassurance, but because it was the first time anyone had said it without blinking. In the top drawer, I kept a photo taken years ago. Not of a graduation or ceremony, just me and Walter on the back porch, 2 chairs slightly tilted, his hands resting on a mason jar of tea, mine wrapped around a notebook. Neither of us smiling, just looking ahead. I hadn't seen that porch in years, but the grain in the wood, the uneven nails, the chipped paint on the railing, I could still name every crack. The tea in that picture had gone cold. Still, he hadn't thrown it out. Just left it there like something worth returning to. Now I understood. Some things aren't meant to be loud. They're meant to be undeniable. I used to think power came from being heard. Now I know some of it lives in ink and silence. The metal pen at the clerk's desk had a slight bend near the middle, as if someone once pressed too hard when signing something final. I kept my signature steady, slow as the document fed through the scanner. The screen blinked a soft green when it accepted my request. The woman behind the desk didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. People don't look for stories in property filings. They just file and move on. I had reviewed every deed myself, county archives, resource maps, scanned parcels from the 1970s to now. Walter had owned the land outright. That much I knew. But buried deeper beyond surface rights were mineral deeds, quiet, overlooked transactions filed years ago. He had transferred the cabin's mineral rights to the Whitmore Initiative 4 months before his diagnosis. Not to a person, not to a family member, to a mission. The original name of the trust was intact in the archived scans, though someone had tried to overwrite it digitally. They missed the notary page, and Walter's initials in the margin. If Douglas had used the cabin as collateral for anything, if Hallie had cited it in a grant application they had built on sand. Every transaction after that point leaned on a lie. The folder Caleb assembled was thick but precise. He'd labeled it Preliminary Action Declarative Notice. Not a threat, not a suit, just a mirror. He highlighted the clauses in blue. This alone is enough to reverse the funding. You don't have to file it. Just let them know it exists. I'd learned that law wasn't always about pursuit. Sometimes it was enough to let people feel the weight of what could be. When I handed the envelope to the clerk for official recording, I didn't explain anything. Just nodded when she asked if I wanted certified copies, mailed or picked up. I chose mail. Less conversation that way. While waiting for the documents to process, I traced the edge of my thumb over the corner of my old military ID, still in my wallet, laminated and quiet. The corners had curled slightly. I hadn't looked at the photo in years. My face was younger, there, less defined. Not softer, just still trying to prove something. Is that all for today? The woman asked. Her voice was neutral. I nodded again and took the receipt. My hand brushed the folder marked Inactive Trusts, W. I pulled it slightly, saw the spine labelled in red Whitmore Legacy Initiative Dormant. I requested it. Inside were the last 5 forms ever filed under the original name. The dissolution request had Hallie's name. Her signature looped high too carefully. The stated reason, inactive and redundant operations. That word, redundant, stood alone on the P as if it had no memory of me. I scanned it, copied it, and returned the folder to its place. On the way out, I passed a wall of veteran records behind glass. Most people don't stop. They're black and white photos all sepia at the edges now. But I paused at the second row, third frame from the right. Walter's enlistment photo. Clean jawline collar slightly tilted. The tag beneath read, Captain Walter R. Whitmore, 1957. That photo wasn't loud. It didn't ask to be praised. But it remained. I heard his voice not from the tapes, not from any letter. Just how it used to sound when he stirred sugar into tea without looking. Always leave a trail, even if no one sees you walk it. I whispered back. You weren't erased. Neither am I. Back at the cabin, I laid the certified documents flat on the table. I aligned them edge to edge. Every copy bore the seal now. Every name had been corrected. Lainey Whitmore, acting trustee and executor. Not honorary. Not assumed. Legal. Caleb's message appeared later that night. Your father got wind of the filings. I didn't say anything, but he's digging. I didn't reply. Another message followed shorter. He asked if it was a bluff. He knew it wasn't. The bluff would have been louder. A letter arrived 2 days later. The handwriting wasn't my father's. It was my mother's tight, cursive, slanted right. You've made your point. I hope you realize what you're trading for pride. Families don't survive on grudges. I folded it once. Then again. I didn't rip it. I didn't keep it. I let it sit between pages of a book I didn't plan to read again. Pride wasn't what this was, but she wouldn't understand. She never did when silence cost less than truth. Hallie posted something the next morning. A photo of her shaking hands with a senator, captioned, Proud to carry on the Whitmore legacy in service and strength. No mention of me. No mention of Walter. Just the brand. I didn't comment. I sent Caleb the copy of the mineral deed instead. He messaged back a thumbs up. Then a pause. "They'll start to worry now," I replied with a single line. "Good." It wasn't revenge. It wasn't grief. It was placement. Returning what had been shifted without consent. Before I turned in that night, I set Walter's old fountain pen next to the newly filed papers. Its tip still worked barely. The last time I saw him use it, he was circling names on a list for board consideration. Mine wasn't circled. It was underlined. That was enough. There's a silence that doesn't ask to be respected. It demands it. The folding chair beneath me creaked slightly when I shifted. 4th row aisle seat. Not at the front. Not hidden. Just placed. The same way I'd organized the memorial program. Simple black, font-thick cardstock. Nothing italicized. I'd chosen the cover photo myself, Walter, outside the Veterans Hall, mid-laugh, holding a paper cup, a smudge of grease on his sleeve. Not polished, not posed, honest. Dean checked the AV one last time. He didn't speak, just nodded, once, then dimmed the lights. The room was fuller than I thought it would be. Not packed, but occupied. Former Navy men in pressed slacks. Women in cardigans, clutching small purses. A senator's aide in the back row, arms folded too tightly. And family arranged like strangers, seated by surname. Douglas adjusted his cuff twice. Cheryl pressed her lips together too pink against her powdered face. Hallie kept tapping her phone under the table even when the lights went down. I didn't prepare a eulogy. I'd already delivered the truth. This wasn't for applause. On the screen, Walter appeared. No music, no fade-in. Just his living room dim lamp behind him. The frame was slightly off-center. His voice came steady, not rehearsed. Not gentle, either. I'm recording this because I know how things work. I know who smiles when I'm around and rewrites when I'm gone. A cough echoed from someone in the back. No one turned. I didn't leave everything to Lainey because she's the favorite. That would have been easy. I did it because she never asked me for anything except the truth. The rest of you, his eyes didn't shift. You'll probably claim surprise, or confusion, or hurt. But deep down, you know, you always knew who tried to understand me, not manage me. The video flickered for half a second. Dean adjusted the focus remotely. No one moved. I loved you all. But love and trust aren't the same currency. He looked down at his hands then. I recognized the shirt he wore, thin flannel worn at the collar, the one he used to wear on early walks before the world woke up. Lainey, if you're playing this, I know it means you didn't give up. You didn't vanish even when they tried to write you out. The screen cut to black. No fade out. No closing title. Just stillness. Dean brought the lights back up slowly. Someone in the front row cleared their throat too loudly. A woman 2 seats down dabbed her nose. No one spoke. I stood. Not rushed, not slow. Just enough movement to signal completion. I didn't bring a tribute. I brought the tape he left. That was his memorial. I stepped back. Not forward. There was no podium. Douglas's voice broke the hush. This was inappropriate. Cheryl added, "Your grandfather wouldn't have wanted a circus." Hallie's voice was louder than it needed to be. "You staged this to humiliate us." I kept my hands at my sides. The memorial program in my left palm had curled at the corners. "He recorded the video himself," I said. I just pressed play. The veterans in the 3rd row nodded not toward me, but at each other. A quiet recognition passed between them like folded flags. One man stood slowly. I recognized his name from the donation records, Frank Leland. He paid for this hall to keep its roof from caving in. Never once asked for recognition. Douglas's eyes didn't meet mine. Another voice chimed in. A woman's sharp bob haircut, blazer too heavy for the weather. And his scholarship fund helped my daughter get through nursing school. We never even got to thank him. No one responded. Not from the front row. Hallie muttered something under her breath and stormed out. Cheryl followed a moment later, heels sharp against the hardwood. Douglas remained seated, his jaw clenched, the kind of clenched that hides absence, not strength. I walked to the donation box near the exit and slipped in an envelope. No name on the outside. Just the same handwriting Walter used when he labeled old peanut butter jars, block letters, all caps. Inside was a check, the exact amount Hallie received using my credentials. Balance doesn't need to be loud. As people filtered out, a woman I didn't recognize brushed my arm. He raised you better than most people raise themselves. I nodded. That was enough. No interviews, no statements. I left the program copy on the table near the door, beneath a faded flyer for a fish fry fundraiser. On my way out, I glanced back once. The folding chairs were half stacked already. Walter's photo still sat on the table, grease stain and all. For the first time in years, no one tried to speak over his voice. And I didn't need to speak at all. I didn't come to hear what I deserved. I came to remember what he knew. There was a scratch on the inside of my watch band. Just beneath the metal clasp, a fine line I couldn't sand away. I'd had it since my second year of active duty. No one ever noticed. I liked that it was hidden. I liked that it cut against the shine. The conference room smelled like fabric softener and lemon-scented wood polish. Everything was staged, glossed, arranged, sterile. The kind of room where people sign things they can't take back. I sat at the far end of the table. Caleb didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His presence was a locked vault. Howard Pennington placed the envelope on the lacquered oak surface with both hands, as if it might bite. His eyes flicked across the table once. Then he began. To Cheryl Whitmore, he read, I leave the antique teapot you once called charming at the spring gala, and later described to your sister as hideous. I trust you'll make peace with both versions of yourself. Cheryl's mouth opened, but she didn't speak. Her pearls shifted slightly above her collar. That, too, seemed rehearsed. To Douglas Ashford, Pennington continued, I leave nothing. You have already taken more than your share, and more than my silence allowed. The table went still. I heard the click of Douglas's jaw, the faint grind of molars behind clenched posture. Then, quietly, this is a farce. The man was barely lucid. Pennington lifted another envelope thinner than the rest. This is his medical affidavit, notarized in Virginia, co-signed by 2 physicians. Douglas didn't reach for it. His hands remained folded, knuckles whitening. Hallie's eyes scanned the room, as if waiting for someone to correct the script. When no one did, she shifted in her chair and turned toward me. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. None of this was necessary. The edge of my thumbnail pressed into the old mark on my wristband. I didn't flinch. No, I replied. But you should know I could. There was no raised voice, no accusation, just clarity, steady as breath. Pennington resumed. To Lainey Whitmore, he said without dramatic pause, I leave the following the cabin at Blue Ridge, the deed and mineral rights attached to said property. All documentation and original filings for the Whitmore Legacy Initiative, including its legal identity and reinstatement privileges, and sole executor rights to the Trust Family Fund under its original designation. He handed a sealed manila folder across the table. I didn't rush to open it. I already knew what was inside. I'd read the same files in 3 states under 3 different clerks. Douglas pushed his chair back an inch. The wheels made no sound. "We'll sue." Pennington didn't blink. "You're welcome to try. The burden of proof won't be on her. I hold video evidence, handwritten letters, audio recordings, and signed declarations from individuals unrelated to your family, each one time-stamped and legally processed." A drop of condensation slid from Cheryl's glass onto the polished table. She didn't reach for a napkin. Caleb remained perfectly still beside me. He hadn't looked at anyone since the meeting began. His hand rested near the edge of his notepad, but he never picked up the pen. Hallie leaned forward. Her voice dropped to a tone that was too soft to be polite. "You waited until he couldn't defend himself. That's what this is. You built a little war out of old receipts and funeral smoke." She wore her mother's scarf. I remembered it from a Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when she called my promotion a nice story for the newsletter. The silk hadn't faded. I folded the clasp of my watch back into place. "He's defending himself," I said. Douglas scoffed. "Oh, spare us the dramatics." Pennington tapped his finger once on the envelope in front of him. "This isn't drama, Mr. Ashford. It's closure. The kind that leaves records." I watched their faces shift, not in grief, not in rage, but in calculation, like gamblers who realized the deck was no longer stacked in their favor. Hallie stood. Her fingers hovered just above her purse, then dropped. "You don't know what you've started." That made me smile, just barely. "I didn't start it," I said. "I just kept the receipts." The meeting ended without formalities. No handshakes, no condolences. Cheryl was the first to leave, followed by Douglas, whose shoes squeaked on the polished tile. Hallie lingered longest, her eyes locked on the folder in front of me. "You were always the shadow," she said, quietly. "Now you want the spotlight." I didn't answer. I just placed the folder into my bag, zipped it slowly, deliberately, like I was sealing a chapter instead of opening one. After they left, Caleb leaned over just slightly and pointed to the corner of the page in the folder. A name in ink. Walter James Whitmore, written in full in his own hand. I didn't say a word. I used to think restoration was about putting things back the way they were. Now, I think it means starting where no one else wants to. The floorboards creaked differently, under new weight, some from age, some from intention. Caleb said nothing as he rewired the circuit panel, careful with every movement, like someone folding a flag. The old coat rack still leaned by the door, its hooks bent from years of holding things that no longer returned. The cabin didn't fight us, but it didn't help either. Dust had its rituals. The walls held their silences. I found a chipped mug with faded text on it. Fort Bragg, Mess Hall, Night 98. I ran a thumb over the lettering, not to clean it, just to confirm it was still there. A paper tag was taped inside a drawer, handwritten in blue ink. Tool receipts. Walter. It wasn't the handwriting that struck me, but the fact that someone had once cared enough to sort things properly. Now, I was putting order back into a space meant to be held. "I'll do the main breaker today," Caleb said, then added, "Water lines tomorrow." I nodded. We didn't talk about the will. We didn't talk about the memorial. We didn't talk about my sister. Instead, we put the chairs back into place, even the broken one that leaned slightly to the left. Not everything needs to be fixed to have value. A girl named Naomi arrived 2 days later. 19. Quiet. A small bag, bigger eyes. She walked in without asking questions, but she glanced at everything like it might disappear. I didn't greet her with a speech. She sat on the edge of the bench and said, "If this is just another pity camp, I'm leaving." I opened a folder and handed her a blank page. "If you had a place that was yours, really, yours, what would you need from it?" She didn't answer. She took the page and didn't write. That was enough for a first day. Later that evening, Maggie Hale brought a pile of mismatched blankets. She didn't knock, just placed them gently on the table and muttered, "Don't let these end up in storage. That'd be a waste." Dean dropped off a projection screen and ran cable through the rafters. "You'll need video if you're planning workshops. Even if it's just movies, it gives people something to look at besides each other." He left a bag of screws. I kept the smallest one in my pocket for the rest of the day. Not sure why. By the end of the week, there were 4 cots. No rules, yet just one unspoken agreement. If you break something, pick it up. If you open something, close it. If you leave, leave a note. The door didn't have a lock. That was on purpose. I cleaned out Walter's desk and found a rolled-up poster of the Appalachian Trail. Not pinned. Just there, like he meant to one day and never got around to it. I tacked it to the wall across from the fireplace. One night, I heard footsteps outside and thought maybe another kid had found us. But it was Hallie. She didn't knock, she didn't look around. Just walked in holding a sealed manila envelope and said, "This is for the scholarship fund, not for forgiveness. Just because now I get it." Her tone wasn't soft. It was flat, like someone delivering a receipt they'd delayed too long. I didn't ask what changed her mind. I didn't offer coffee or invite her to stay. I looked her in the eye. Good. Starting over takes action, not ceremony. She left without another word. I didn't follow. Inside the envelope were transfer forms and a personal check, not huge, but real. The name of the fund was handwritten again this time, with mine spelled correctly. I tucked it into the drawer beneath Walter's dog tags, not to hide it, just to let it sit among things that understood weight. One of the veterans Russell brought an old garden shovel and started clearing the back lot. He said nothing, just worked in quiet loops like he was digging something out of himself. I didn't interrupt. A girl named Bree asked if we could repaint the south wall. She chose a shade of blue called Anchor Wind. It wasn't a color I'd ever pick, but it matched the ceiling unexpectedly well. I caught my own reflection in the cabin window later that day. Not because I was looking, but because the light curved in such a way it made me pause. I looked older, but not worn, like something had settled. The morning after, Caleb sat beside me on the front steps, sipping from that old Fort Bragg mug. He didn't comment on the noise inside, the distant hum of someone vacuuming, another trying to fix the pantry hinge. "I think this works," he finally offered. "Not because of what you say, but because you don't say much." I looked down at my hands. The old calluses had softened, but the shape remained. They don't need another voice, just space to find their own. He nodded and leaned back, the wooden railing groaning beneath him, like an old friend returning to the conversation. I received a letter a week later, typed, not handwritten, from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Your grandfather would have hated the mess, it said, but he'd have respected the rebuild. There was no signature. I folded it twice and left it beside the Appalachian Trail poster. Some things don't need frames to carry meaning. At night, I heard the quiet breathing of 5 people who didn't know each other until this place. The cabin still creaked, still let wind in at the corners, but Now the air smelled like dish soap and pine, not dust. A small corkboard on the wall began filling up. Job applications, book titles, one paper that simply read, "Stay." Nobody pinned it with flair, just a single pushpin. A little crooked. Perfect. I didn't start this to be thanked. I didn't start this to be seen. I just wanted to take one place they couldn't erase me from, and leave it open enough so no one else would be. Some things you don't reclaim by force. You reclaim them by outlasting, and sometimes the loudest thing you can offer is a room that listens. I didn't expect the silence to sound like belonging. The porch boards held the faint heat of yesterday's sun. I stood barefoot on them, feeling the grain under my soles like the memory of something steady. The air smelled of cedar and clay, with a hint of yeast from the morning bread rising in the main kitchen. Below the hill, someone was laughing, one of the younger ones. I couldn't tell who. The laughter had no sharpness in it, just rhythm like a wheel finally turning the right way. A crow landed on the fence post, one eye on the compost heap, the other on me. It didn't startle when the hammering resumed from the west end of the property. Dean had said the new shed wouldn't build itself, and Zach had answered by picking up the heavier mallet. On my desk inside, the only photograph left faced the wall. It wasn't turned in anger. I had simply run out of reasons to keep it visible. What remained was the old brass pocket watch, its casing dented near the hinge, its hands stubborn but honest. It no longer ticked, but it still marked something. They called me Coach Vi now. I didn't ask them to. I didn't correct it. Labels fall away faster when you don't glue them down yourself. Hallie was early today. She had set up folding chairs under the annex's awning and taped large sheets of resume templates across the chalkboard. Her sleeves were pushed up to the elbow, revealing the faint crease of a faded bracelet she no longer wore. A girl in a camo hoodie leaned in and whispered something. Hallie gave a half smile and handed her a pen. Across the path, Caleb adjusted the irrigation system. The drone hovered awkwardly at first, then died as it mapped the rows of spinach and beets. One of the students had coded the route after dinner 2 nights ago. I found the test sketches under my door the next morning, held down by a smooth river stone. I moved toward the greenhouse. A boy named Zach stood by the raised beds, pressing his name into a wooden marker, Zach, carrots. His tongue stuck out at the corner of his mouth, his brow furrowed like it mattered. It did. Behind me, I heard the shuffle of sneakers. "Ms. Lainey." The voice was small, new. "Who's Mr. Whitmore? His name's on, everything." I didn't look back. I just tightened the string holding up the tomato stalk. "A man who believed I could build," I said. Even before I did. He didn't reply. Footsteps faded. Leaves crunched. The question didn't linger. By the door to the common room, Maggie Hale had placed 2 cups of coffee again, one with cream, one black. She never explained which was whose. She never drank both. The whiteboard listed the day's schedule in crooked letters: woodworking, gardening, media training. No one enforced it strictly. Some days were slower. Some days standing upright was enough work. On the far wall, a wooden plaque had been hung quietly last week, though, for those who refused to disappear. Caleb said it was Dean's idea. Dean said it was Maggie's. Maggie just swept around it like it had always been there. In the storage cabin beneath the blueprints and garden plans, I found a letter I'd written the week prior and never mailed. The envelope was sealed but unaddressed. The ink on the front read only, "If it matters." I hadn't decided yet whether it did. Inside the paper said, "Your granddaughter still stands here, not to be seen." But because for the first time she sees herself, I tucked it beneath the pocket watch and didn't move it again. Later that morning, Hallie walked past carrying a bin of magnifying glasses and clipboards. She didn't wear lipstick anymore, just chapstick and focus. When she waved to a student, the motion was quick, practical. "You're not going to say anything," she murmured, pausing. I looked at the ground where one of the old tiles had shifted under last week's rain. "You're showing up. That's enough." She didn't argue, just kept walking. I sat under the arbor next to the drying herbs and tool hooks. A breeze tugged at the wind chime. One of the girls, Jessie, I think, had tuned it to play the first 4 notes of an old hymn. Not that anyone sang it. It was just familiar. No one asked anymore if I planned to expand or go public or bring in a board. Growth wasn't measured here by funding rounds. It was measured in the raised shoulders of a boy who used to sleep curled up, in the straight-spined silence of a girl who now met your gaze without apology. A young man dropped a sketchbook in front of me. I didn't ask for explanation. He tapped the corner where a design for a pollinator tower was scribbled. Then he pointed to the hill. I nodded. He didn't smile, but he stayed a moment longer before leaving. That was its own kind of thank you. Inside, someone adjusted the music in the workshop. A Johnny Cash song gave way to the low beat of something newer. Caleb winced. Dean shrugged. Maggie hummed along. No one told anyone to lower the volume. It stayed at the edge of comfort, like most things worth learning. I walked the perimeter just once, fingers brushing the tops of fence posts, the bark of the pecan trees. One of them had a faint carving on the underside. I recognized the initials. Not mine. Not his. Either. Someone had claimed a spot. Quietly. I let it be. By afternoon, the sun had pulled further west. I bent beside the herb beds and pulled a strand of grass out from the thyme. As I moved to toss it aside, I noticed the garden label crooked in the soil. Zach. Carrots. I straightened it, brushed off the smudge with my sleeve. Voices behind me began to rise. Not in conflict, just energy. Maggie poured water into a clean mug. Caleb checked the drone's calibration. Hallie lifted a crate onto her shoulder without waiting for help. No one turned to me for approval. That was the proof. And as I stood, knees stiff, hands dirty, I looked up. The sky filtered light through empty branches overhead, casting quiet shadows across the ground, like threads of something still stitching itself together. I didn't need a chair at their table. I had built the table. And it held